Hello and welcome to the Week in Review live on NTN. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching on air, online, YouTube, Facebook, our channel 122, welcome to you, residents in St. Lucia, St. Lucians in the diaspora, and well-wishers globally who are keeping abreast of what's happening here in St. Lucia, developments from the government of St. Lucia. My name is Jessie Leonce, and I'm joined by my colleagues, as usual now, again, Ms. Lisa Joseph and Mr. Tony Nicholas. Good morning.
Good morning.
Bonjour. Wonderful.
Good morning to our listeners and viewers.
Today is the last day of October, the 31st of October 2020. And as we look back on the week that was, it's quite eventful, just like the week before. We did register additional cases of COVID-19. And the government of St. Lucia has instituted stricter protocols to address COVID-19's community spread. Also in the headlines for this past week, we had three patients, I believe, of COVID-19 recovering, and then two more confirming toward the end of the week, Friday, 30th of October. The government of St. Lucia heeds the advice by the IMF for economic diversification, but calls for proportionate regulation for their emerging industries. And that came out of a presser held on Wednesday, I believe, with the Honorable Prime Minister and other finance officials following the annual meetings of the IMF and the Board of Governors of the World Bank held earlier this month. We'll get into the details of that in just a moment. And the GIS suffers immense loss following a break-in this week. We will also talk about that. So do stick around as we go over the lead stories for this past week. On Monday, we heard from the Prime Minister, Honorable Alan Chastanet, and he heaped praise. He lauded, commended the St. Lucian public for what he deemed an incredible job in adhering to the COVID-19 protocols during a time when it's traditionally known for island-wide celebration. That was the Journée Creole weekend. But as we've come down to the end of October, by the end of this week, the government was confronted with the increase in cases and had to make some decisions. Given the current status of the active COVID-19 cases and the projections, the government of St. Lucia has implemented protocols in order to curb the spread of COVID-19 to be effective Friday, October 30th, 2020, and to remain in effect for the next 30 days. And we're seeing these stricter, tighter protocols being implemented just a month after the end of the state of emergency here in St. Lucia. On the recommendations of the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Sharon Belmar-George, the Command Center also, and following a consultative session with the National Emergency Management Advisory Committee, that is NEMAC, and various stakeholders as well, the Cabinet of Ministers decided to implement new measures to combat the spread of COVID-19 in country. Among the measures is a call for employers in St. Lucia to institute a work-from-home programs. Prime Minister Honorable Alan Chastanet elaborated on the measures during a national update on NTN yesterday.
Most of our cases are on the northwestern zone and on the eastern zone, and over the last few days we've been noting cases in the south of the island going towards the western area as well. This gives an idea of how our cases have increased since the first case on the 13th of March. And if you notice in the last 3 epi weeks, the rate of increase has been at a much higher level as compared to earlier on in the outbreak. Okay,
All agencies and businesses should implement a blended service operations approach where possible for the employees. The approach should allow for the functioning of all services and operations utilizing online platforms and standard health protocol where feasible. This recommendation aims to reduce the physical numbers in the workplace and curb possible transmission. Reduced mass crowd events. Mass crowd events are reduced from 50 to 25 people per venue, per activity. No special provisions will be extended for ground, space, or structural provisions. Religious institutions. Religious institutions are to be guided by the square footage of their respective spaces. Each religious institution must be aware of how many people can access the building, but the maximum number of people of 100 for those institutions that are very large. Business operating hours. Cease all business operations and commercial activities by 9 p.m. Essentially, this will assert a minimal operations approach. Exemptions will be listed. This recommendation aims to discourage the physical spread of people during typical hours of high-risk business activity island-wide.
Schools are to remain closed, however, ensure continued learning via the blended learning approach that began earlier this year. The sale of alcohol is permissible, however, it is a grab-and-go business at bars only. All bars and restaurants are to close by 9 p.m. In-dining is allowed at restaurants, but restricted to 25 patrons at any given time. There has been no order of a curfew. Please note, there has been no order of a curfew. However, the public is advised to limit movement during the hours of 9 p.m. to 5 p.m. And Lisa, I guess at this point in time, there are stricter protocols being put in place, but there's still a level of responsibility on the part of individuals to use their discretion in their going out and coming in.
But I think that is what the Prime Minister, as well as the CMO, the Cabinet of Ministers, or based the decision on, along with stakeholders, when they had that meeting before the official announcement of the new measures. And we opened by speaking about the Prime Minister and how he lauded the St. Lucian public for their conduct over our je ne creole, or lack of the je ne creole. And I think it's that sort of demonstration by the St. Lucian public that they are able to follow and that they're able to take that sort of personal responsibility. So I think the thinking behind that was to build on that and allow the St. Lucian public to be more of an integral part of keeping St. Lucia safe. We don't necessarily, well, certainly I don't want to feel like I have to be ordered all the time to do something for my own good. So how do we allow ourselves to be part and parcel of that process, something as something so bigger than ourselves? So I am thinking that this way, definitely you get that buy-in from the public, and it doesn't seem that anyone is being pressed in order for them to do the right things, follow the protocols. So it is left to be seen how it is all going to plan out, especially when we talk about limiting that voluntary limitation of movement, Tony, because we know that our people, by nature, the Caribbean flair, we love it. We need to be out on the weekend, on an evening, but we've heard from the police force that it is not a question of whether someone is going to be put in handcuffs if they found out after 9 p.m. Of course, there's discretion being exercised by the police officers. Your thoughts, Tony?
And I think, well, the whole voluntary, if you may look at it that way, voluntary curfew, if I say that, goes in tandem with the fact that places of business will be closed by 9 p.m. So you won't have restaurants open, entertainment places open. So really and truly, there's nowhere to congregate except at home, except if you move in from one household to the next or going to visit a friend or what have you. So I think the ability of our citizenry to go by this will prove how best we could manage this pandemic. The CMO did mention yesterday as well during the press conference that though a 30-day period is the window that they're looking at, I mean, if after 15 days there's a change, then the protocols could either increase or relax. So the onus is on us as a citizens how best we adhere to those enhanced protocols and just do what it takes to sort of flatten the curve and before this gets worse.
Yeah, and so once again, the restriction of movement is 9 p.m. to 5 a.m.
Yes, the public is advised. So it's not an institutional curfew. It is an advisory to limit movement from the hours of 9 p.m. to 5 a.m.
Do you get a sense that perhaps people would have wanted that label, curfew?
I think it takes the responsibility away. There's some people who prefer to have it from the top down than from the bottom up.
Yes.
And so it ensures that there is a blanket, blanket covering over the entire country. It makes them feel more comfortable, I'd imagine. But when you give the personal responsibility, then you might see fluctuations in compliance. And then there's concerns for flaws in the system, flaws in adhering, and then the risk of possible transmission.
But I'm wondering if it also takes that sort of anxiety off the society as well. Because if facing with the rising cases, that's one level of anxiety. And then to deal with measures, or for you to hear that the state of emergency is back in or curfew is in. So I'm wondering if that doesn't have the sort of psychological effect as well to keep people calm.
Either way, I think we saw when we had the lockdown on April 1st, and subsequently the slow activity happening in St. Lucia. A lot of persons were concerned. A lot of persons wanted to indulge in alcohol to release, their anxieties. So you are right, Lisa, that when you have this sort of blanket national sweep, the cordoning off of certain areas, the north and the south sectioned off, it does lend to some, persons being anxious, about their environment and what have you. But also now there are some people who feel like maybe we need to have, this national enforcement of it. But it all, I guess this is something that we can begin to observe and to see, as Tony mentioned, the 30-day period. We monitor how persons respond and react in terms of compliance, adhering, and decisions thereafter will be made.
But the big thing for a lot of people is schools.
Yes.
And so schools will remain closed for the next 30 days.
Yes.
And it means now that you have to revert to what we started with, that like 6 months ago, that blended approach. And also meaning that parents are now back into the thick of things again, trying to assist. But Tony, I know that you work closely with the ministry in terms of the sort of programs. We did hear from the Prime Minister that another order of the loan book has been made, some in the region of
4,000 have been procured, yes. Well, initially, of course, as you know, the loan book program was slated for just certain schools. So now this is going to be broadened to all of the secondary schools to ensure, that the syllabus is followed virtually. And these loan books are very interactive. So that is entrenched right now. We also have the continued training of our teachers in the use of the various platforms and the various processes to engage students with the e-learning. A lot of that in the first instance is targeted at the secondary schools. With the primary schools, we're still looking at mixed modalities in terms of the preparation of printed material being prepared by the teachers and the staff of the school, and parents being allowed certain days to pick up printed material or packages for the students, for delivery to the students. So it has worked prior to the reopening, and it is going to be enhanced, and I suspect next week there'll be a further announcement by the Department of Education, by the education officials, as to what we'll obtain over the next 30 days.
Yeah. And last week we were saying that schools are so important beyond just the talk and talk that happens in the classroom and the education of our children, but there's a whole economy around the school system. So you have the vendors, you have the bus drivers. So all of these people are also now being impacted by the fact that there's no school going on at this time. So all around, we are looking at, and we've said it from the onset of COVID, that the battle really is on two fronts.
And you also have other aspects that the children look forward to, the contact sports. I mean, sporting activities have been canceled. You have activities
and
like
just socializing.
the dance classes and what have you. They really look forward to those things, those activities within the school program. So, like you said, just socializing and interacting with their friends, which is we tend to ignore it, but this is like a basic human need, and to have that curtailed. And, children, we sit in here, we discuss these issues among ourselves, but the kids too, they have questions. And some of them do not have that avenue to express themselves and to see how they're feeling, what they're going through. So at this time, the psychosocial support is also very, very important, not just for the children, but for parents, for teachers, and for all of us at this time, experiencing some form or level of anxiety.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, the hosting of contact sports, high-risk sporting activities, and events right now are strongly discouraged by the authorities. Non-contact sports will be listed and published in the coming days by the authorities. Now, no sooner had the CMO and the officials in general informed us that 2 patients had recovered earlier this week, and just yesterday, 1 patient recovered. Another 2 more cases were registered on Friday. That's just yesterday, October 30th. Here is a clip from the latest statement from Dr. Belmar George, tallying up the confirmed cases to 78 and giving us an update on these latest 2 being diagnosed.
Today, Friday, October 30th, 2020, the Ministry of Health received confirmation of 2 new cases of COVID-19. This brings the total number of cases diagnosed to date in country to 78. Case number 77 is a 34-year-old male from the Castries district. Case number 78 is a 31-year-old female from the Gros-Islet district. Both of these cases were identified through the contact tracing process and following testing for COVID-19 were placed in quarantine while awaiting their results. Both cases number 77 and number 78 are contacts of case number 55. As per protocol, arrangements have been made for their transfer into care at the respiratory hospital. The Ministry of Health today recorded a recovery of 1 case of COVID-19, resulting in 50 cases now being active in care in country.
Dr. Belmar George says the national management of COVID-19 cases is now in the containment phase. Therefore, all positive cases are being admitted to the respiratory hospital for treatment and care. Roger, do we have the clip on the containment clip there? Yes, however, careful attention is being paid to the strain on bed space at the respiratory hospital. Dr. Sharon Belmar George explains we have the cases on island, confirmed cases 78, active cases 50, and so we're seeing the numbers are climbing and capacity at the respiratory hospital has now come down for consideration.
The hospital, in a very proactive way, from the time the contact tracing was done and even before the confirmation of those cases, they did put a plan together to see how they would quarantine those persons who need to be and to provide services to the public, because as you would imagine, this is our main public hospital. So in a very proactive way, they've looked at how they would recruit staff from other public facilities, also part-time staff, to ensure that emergencies are dealt with, and services which for some of the outpatient clinics are being provided within our community services. So far, from the 119 tests that were done, both staff, clinical staff and support services, we had 1 more positive which was detected within the hospital. So we anticipate that after the period of quarantine and retesting, we would gradually go back to normal. It also gave the hospital the opportunity to review their protocols and their policies to ensure adherence at every level within the hospital setting. So it is something which we've prepared for. We anticipated, especially the hospital is seen as a high-risk institution.
So Dr. Sharon Belmar George. And just to give you an update on the institutions that have been impacted by COVID-19, where their employees, their staff have been diagnosed with the disease. 2 physicians are among the positive COVID-19 cases recorded recently. Dr. Belmar George did inform that 1 is a contact of case number 39. There has since been massive testing at the Owen King EU Hospital, with 119 tests being conducted, and this resulted in 1 being detected. And
that's
so
an additional.
That's additional, yeah. Staff. And also, we've so far seen as a result that they have pulled back clinics, outpatient clinic activity at the hospital to ensure there is limited movement at the facility. Operations at the Miku fire station remain suspended after an individual assigned to the station tested positive for COVID-19 on October 22nd. So in the last 2 weeks, there have been extensive deep cleaning at the Miku fire station. We did get a statement from the fire chief. He did speak to this matter, ensuring that persons not come to that place until there was the cleaning done, and ensuring that the rest of the staff, the personnel on duty, were tested and cleared off for COVID-19. The NIC, National Insurance Corporation, in a Facebook post this week, confirmed that one member of its team at the Viewfort office tested positive for COVID-19. In the interest of safeguarding members of the public and the staff, the Viewfort office was closed, and it has been closed until further notice. All other offices of the NIC remain open. So that is the Rodney Bay branch, the Soufriere branch, and the Castries main office. You can get service at these offices in the meantime, as the NIC tries to look at alternative arrangements for their Viewfort customers. Overall, in St. Lucia, 10,686 tests have been conducted. That is 10,686 tests have been conducted. The rise in the cases has also led to an increase in incidence of stigmatization. We turn a curve in our COVID-19 talk. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Sharon Belmar-George says such behavior can have serious implications. And I know that the Ministry of Health has put out a PSA so far addressing this issue of stigmatization. But in the meantime, we hear from the CMO on these implications that it can have for us in our fight against COVID.
With the growing number of cases, the Ministry of Health's public health team has been noting a high level of concern and even fear amongst the public. This has, in some instances, resulted in individuals who've been diagnosed with the virus being stigmatized. This stigma can be very discouraging and cause great stress to people who are infected with the virus, as well as their family, their friends, and colleagues, and the wider community in which they reside. If not addressed from now, the Ministry of Health, we anticipate that this stigma can become a barrier to individuals who require testing coming forward to do so. We ask everyone to be supportive of each other. The COVID-19 virus can be contracted by anyone of any age, gender, or social status. So let's look out not only for ourselves, but for each other. Everyone needs to stick to the guidelines that have been put in place to keep us all safe.
That was the CMO once again speaking on the serious implications that stigmatization on health officials, health personnel, healthcare workers, and also on patients of COVID-19, the implications it can have on us in the fight against COVID here in St. Lucia. And as I mentioned, the PSA has been put out by the Ministry of Health to spread awareness about this and how, interacting with a healthcare worker, how you manage this if you come upon one. Going on a bus, I believe that was the scene that was set in the PSA, being on a bus and a healthcare worker flagging down the bus. How do you deal with that situation? So please be patient with the system, and stigmatization is not the answer. Yeah?
Yeah, because, last week I was saying what we need is to just simply mature as a nation. And as we've seen with any other crisis, health crisis, pandemic, epidemic, disease in the world, stigmatizing people, it's not the way to go. It's not the answer. What it does, it simply drives that disease underground. And that is what we do not want. We don't want to have a situation where people will stay home fearful, and they have all of those symptoms and they remain simply because they're afraid to seek that medical care, because for one reason or the other, their name may end up out in the public domain, making the rounds on social media, their photos everywhere, their family members, all of their business is out there for the public. And so what we want is for us to be able to embrace our brothers and sisters and say, well, you're not alone. Let's fight this thing together. And we also need to be very mindful that it can happen to you. The time that you will spend talking about Susan down the street maybe at that point you forgot and you held the door handle and then you took it to your hand to your face and all you know, that's all you needed. And then you're stricken with COVID. So we need to be mindful that we are all in this together in the same boats. There's no need for you to point fingers at anyone. But there's another thing I'm concerned about, guys, and that is the COVID, and I think much like how we saw with HIV/AIDS, where for quite some time the focus was really on HIV/AIDS, and other diseases seem to have gone, just really undetected or really underappreciated. I can sense it, and I speak with people who also have underlying conditions, and they're fearful to go to the doctor, they're fearful to get out of the house. So they may be diabetic, they may be hypertensive, other diseases, and they just don't want to go seek any sort of medical attention because they're afraid to leave the house as well. Because they don't want to have to catch any infection or get their condition worse, but also that the national focus is on COVID. And so that leaves our other citizens who are afflicted with other diseases really very vulnerable and exposed.
I think it just calls for a time of great sensitivity. Social media to a large extent have sort of desensitized persons. There's this appetite, this hunger to just want to know for knowing's sake. So we want to know someone's name, where they're working, and all of that information, which in most instances is really irrelevant, just to expose a person to what end. So I think, we're just really calling for sensitivity at this time, because COVID is no respecter of race, of class, of age, of nothing. It could happen to any one of us at any one time, and no one is calling this upon themselves. So to purposely, point somebody out or to push them away or to try to ostracize them just because they may be suspected of having COVID is definitely not the way to go. As you said earlier, this may be driving persons away and keeping them from being tested for fear that their information is being exposed. The new phenomenon in St. Lucia is leaks.
Yeah.
We just want to leak everything. We want to be the first to put it out there, but sometimes we just need to hold back and ask ourselves, what good am I doing by putting this person's information out there? What am I really doing? Am I helping the national good? You hear persons talking about St. Lucia, we love St. Lucia. But St. Lucia is made up of people. It's made up of citizens like you and I. So if we really care about each other, if we really care about our brothers and sisters, we would be mindful. Let's just put aside all the politics and just show a little compassion for each other, especially at this time. It is really a very sensitive time. Persons have real fears, real anxieties, and we need to acknowledge that. So the stigma, the discrimination, it is really, really uncalled for.
Yeah, and I could even extend that to, the recent pursuit to determine which hotel, and if it's a hotel, and if it's the source of COVID-19, if it's that.
Is it a guest?
Yeah, is it a guest? Is it a visitor to St. Lucia? And, I know of some other islands, Lisa, we're talking about that, the Turks and Caicos and the Bahamas, who defend their tourism industry tooth and nail. And not to say that we should withhold information for the sake of it and, cutting our nose to spite our face. But, if it is not relevant, and if by all accounts of the officials that is not indeed the source of any COVID-19, then, it should not be pursued because the world is watching.
The world is watching, and whether we like it or not, that's just what it is. Tourism is what we have. Can we build other industries stronger than what tourism is? I am sure that we can. The question is, can we build it in this short space of time so that it can sustain us at this time? That is the question.
And why are we building it? Do we have to demonize tourism?
No.
Why demonize something that has impacted and will continue to impact lives beyond just the 16,000 workers?
Well, and that may be direct workers, because
yes.
I think too that when we speak about the tourism industry, I think somehow that there is this very narrow view of the tourism industry simply being the hotel and the workers in the hotel. But we do not see all of the other linkages that come in. I think anybody taking a listen to the boat tour operators, who would have thought that we had so many young men, so many companies that employ, whether it be 3 to 4 to 5 to 10 individuals who rely on the offshoot of tourism. Then you have those who do diving, those who do a little snorkeling business on the side. There is just so much that happens with tourism, but we are very fixated in this space that tourism is about the hotel and the hotel workers. We have more than 54,000 people who are relying on the tourism industry. So at the end of the day, we can see how the breadth of what tourism brings to this economy and the linkages that it really forms. I mean, agriculture is great, yes. It's absolutely a backbone industry, agreed. But can agriculture really create all of the linkages that we see with tourism on its own? Is it able to have so many different tentacles? As I think in a private conversation, Jesse, I was saying to you that for artists, how do we see agriculture really providing that sort of economic earning platform for artists?
Tourism has that latitude.
Exactly.
Tourism has a benefit to agriculture, But we have to stick a pin in that. We're due for a break right now. So do stay tuned. When we come back, we look at the week. We continue to look at the week. We have 50 active cases in St. Lucia of COVID-19. The total number of cases confirmed in country to date is 78. Please take note of that. As you're going out, you're going to town later, ensure that you carry your mask with you and a little bottle of hand sanitizer. Rub your hand and go about observing the 6-foot distance. Yeah? Stay with us.
We are at war with the virus, ready to harm us. Panic is not the answer. We can win this together. Often use hand sanitizer. Better yet, use soap and water.
We must protect each other if we are to beat this corona.
Together let us win this war. Be a soldier for St. Lucia. Together let us win this war. Be a soldier, together we can beat this corona.
So you don't become the next case. Avoid touching your face. I'm sure you've been told so. Handshakes and hugging are a no.
Advice give you the please. Cover your mouth and your nose if you cough or sneeze.
Practice social distancing and avoid large social gatherings.
Together let us win this war. Be a soldier for St. Lucia. Together let us win this war. St. Lucia, be a soldier. Together we can beat this corona.
For further information, please contact the hotline at 311 or the Bureau of Health Education at 468-5349.
Keeping hands clean is important for good health. However, after a disaster, staying clean is hard to do, especially if there is no pipe-borne water. Simple things you can do to stay clean and remain healthy are: wash your hands with soap and clean water. If these are not available, sanitizers with alcohol are options. Wash your hands many times during the day, before preparing food, eating, caring for a sick person or baby, treating a cut, wound, or sore. Wash hands after using the bathroom, changing diapers, caring for animals, caring for sick or injured persons, after handling garbage. Washing your hands is one of the best ways to prevent illness. For further information, contact the Bureau of Health Education at telephone number 468-5349.
Thank you so much for staying with us. This is the Week in Review live on NTN this Saturday morning, the 31st of October 2020. We're looking back at the week that was, and we've so far seen that the government of St. Lucia has had stricter protocols on the country, for the country, due to the increased cases that we've so far been registering. And before we went to break, we were just talking about the strength of the tourism sector here in St. Lucia. And on that note, I want to introduce this next story. St. Lucia extended a warm and safe welcome to the world's largest travel and tourism company, that is TUI Airways, as they touched down at the Uranora International Airport on Tuesday this week. This is the airline's first flight to St. Lucia since the closure of our borders to commercial airlines on March 25th due to COVID-19. Do take a look at this report.
TUI's winter weekly direct flights from London Gatwick to Uranora International Airport will run through to March 2021. This is the fourth consecutive year that the travel company has flown to the island, showing its commitment and confidence in the tourism authorities and people of St. Lucia. By continuing to manage COVID-19 protocols, St. Lucia has been included in TUI's long-haul program for 2020-2021 as one of only 3 Caribbean destinations featured. As St. Lucia continues its phased responsible reopening, 182 passengers and crew members from the UK on TUI flight TOM 24 were welcomed with a full complement of safety protocols in place, including the wearing of masks, screening at a nurse's station, verification of travel documents, and sanitizing of hands and luggage.
We really want to say thank you to our partners for their commitment in maintaining the COVID-19 protocols. We know that it is not an easy task, as it has not been our nature, but these are really the reasons why our airlines continue to choose and support St. Lucia. And for TUI, year after year, the continued commitment, even through the challenging times, speaks volumes. Our international visitors have also come to understand the importance of the health and safety measures that are being put in place, as well as for our returning nationals. And we know that these are the reasons that they continue to choose St. Lucia, because they feel safe. And of course, when they are in St. Lucia, there are protocols that will be followed that will also ensure that they too can have a good time, all while observing the health and safety put in place by our health authorities.
Public Relations Manager at the St. Lucia Tourism Authority, Doreen Georges, says that TUI services several hotels in St. Lucia.
With the return of TUI, it means that many hotels are opening up again. Many of our certified properties will be back in operation, and that also means that staff will be back on the job. Some of the resorts have already indicated to us that come next week, they will be operating at 100% occupancy. And some of these hotels that are serviced by TUI include the Royalton, Hideaway at Royalton, Mystique by Royalton, Rendezvous, Bay Gardens Hotel, Bay Gardens Beach Resort, Harbour Club, Bellevue, Sugar Beach, Starfish, and the Body Holiday.
A second weekly flight begins from 5th November from Manchester in the UK, serving the north of the country. All travelers to St. Lucia are encouraged to ensure that travel documents are on hand when at the nurse's station, immigration and customs, in an effort to expedite screening processes. For more information about St. Lucia's COVID-19 response, all protocols and details of requirements prior to entry, you can visit www.stlucia.org/COVID-19. From the Government Information Service, Lisa Joseph reporting.
Want to speak on that, Lisa? And that report there welcoming TUI Airways, the world's largest travel and tourism company, as they touched down at the Uranora International Airport Tuesday. This is the airline's first flight to the island since we closed our borders back in March to commercial flights here on island.
And so in that report, you would have heard Doreen Georges speak about the number of hotels that are now going to be registered in 100% occupancy. And I can tell you that I've interacted with some of the tourism workers, and they are just ecstatic to be back at work and being able to earn a living, because let's face it, the bills have been piling up for people who've been staying at home with no way of being able to get that income to pay. And even though you had that income support program going on, certainly that is no substitution for an income. And there just isn't any country who can continue to pay large sums of money to its citizens and expect that this will last for the duration of COVID. It's just not possible. And so even in the mighty Dubai, you know, people have to work. You have to get out there, and the country's open, and you have to do what you have to do. But there's also, I think, another issue that's popping up here. With all of these hotels now reopening, Tony, what we have is now a situation where we were using some of these facilities as our quarantine facilities.
Yes.
So that means now alternative measures now need to come into play. And I suppose within the next week we'll be hearing more about that from the authorities, because now that the hotels, now they want to get back into business, because let's not forget, you are running a business. And now that they need the premises back.
Yeah.
So where does that leave, you know, all of those efforts, the quarantine efforts and so forth? So as I said, there'll be more coming out on that in terms of what those arrangements would be from the authorities within the week.
And just something else that we should clarify, because we've seen the misinformation in the public domain. You have persons, unfortunately, suggesting that the tourists are coming in, and when they come in, they're free to roam, free to go about. And that is simply not the case. There are certain specified tours that they are allowed to go on, and again, these are within certain protocols. So through the hotels, they would book those tours, and they have to also register the information, where they're going, what time they're estimated to be back, and what have you. And of course, we have certified taxi operators taking them to and from these stores. So certainly it's not a situation where they come in, they're free to just leave their hotels and roam about and so on. So you have these rumors being peddled. Of course, again, going back to human nature, we have persons, even us as citizens, who from time to time will try to break protocols, so to speak. So you may have the odd case, but I know for sure that the situation is being policed both by the hotel security as well as by our national security forces. So
we've had a few testimonials from visitors, and they've indicated how much they've appreciated the level of safety and precaution that St. Lucia has attached to the reopening of the tourism industry. And they too have expressed their own willingness and desire to keep themselves safe. And so the idea that people will not want to travel just to come and be holed up in a hotel room or in a hotel property, I would think, and if we look at across the Caribbean as well, we realize that people are traveling to the Caribbean. And I think really the appetite is there, because you could see that the region is low in COVID infection. And I think it's just beautiful. It's just a different place to be. So people will travel, because we, human beings, we are resilient. I don't think that people necessarily want to allow any one incident or event or pandemic to control the rest of their lives. And so, and we see it with the millennials, you know, they're going to be daring and come out and that sort of thing. So all in all, I think that when people come to St. Lucia, when they touch ground, just taking a look at that scenery, just having the drive up. And of course, you know, we have some of the most beautiful hotel properties around. And I would love to just go and lounge by a pool or something, or just be in a different bedroom space, if you will.
Especially if all you've been seeing around you is gray and the metropolitan, you know, big concrete jungles, especially now so empty, and you know, there's just this energy, you know,
and it's
of the
just
place.
heavy and dreary, and you just want to free your mind.
And to get away from it and to come, you know, people think being holed up is such a bad thing, but
no,
hey,
it depends. It's the space that you hold up. That's my view. It's the space. You know, I do want to say quickly good morning to Cynthia and good morning to Don Marie. I know that they're very ardent followers. And I realize that, you know, Cokes, I know Cokes is their favorite. Just to let you know, that don't worry, we're working on that. Everything is in tip-top shape. And he'll be back with us before you know it. So hopefully next week, he will be here. So we'll be having the entire gang back together for you.
Wonderful. I'm definitely looking forward to that. I myself, I've missed Cokes.
We all do.
Yeah. Mrs. Energy.
Just continuing, Melissa, you were just speaking about where do we go from the quarantine facilities, which were the hotels, going back to their regular operations. The government of St. Lucia has thanked St. Lucians for their patience and understanding regarding the erection of a fence along the Redwood Beach. I know initially that was a point of contention. The fence was an additional security measure to address unauthorized entry and exits at the nation's first COVID-19 quarantine facility in Rodney Bay. At the time, Dr. Sharon Belmar George explained that there had been several breaches at the facility, the public health facility, due to the open beach access. The fence was erected after a number of security measures provided inadequate support, including increased security personnel and installation of cameras. And since the facility is no longer being used for the quarantine, things are going back to business as usual. We're so far seeing that the fence was taken down a few days ago. The CMO has thanked the public for their cooperation in that regard. So please take note. We continue this morning with some bulletin information. The Department of Economic Development, Transport and Civil Aviation has been closely monitoring the recent upsurge in the spread of the novel coronavirus. Public health officials have advised that in addition to practicing good personal hygiene, social distancing is the most effective strategy to prevent the spread of COVID-19. To the Transport Division, safety of its staff and clients is of the utmost priority. In an effort to reduce the risk of further spreading this disease, the public is informed of the following. Please take note. Practical driving examinations will be suspended with effect from Friday, October 30th, 2020 until further notice. Theoretical examinations will be suspended with effect from Monday, November 9th, 2020 until further notice. The public is also encouraged to conduct transactions using the DigiGov portal, digigov.govt.lc. It works, it's very efficient. The Transport Division can be contacted via telephone number 468-6300 or email address transport@govt.lc for any required assistance. So please take note. I'm going to come away from the COVID-19 news for a little while just to speak on the World Bank, the annual meeting of the IMF and the Board of Governors of the World Bank. St. Lucia did have a voice in that meeting, and we did see this week finance officials did come forward to keep the country abreast of what transpired. During the meetings, the government of St. Lucia joined small island developing states in a bid for more relevant interventions contributing to their economic agenda of sustainable and equitable growth. The IMF and the World Bank's assistance to SIDS, including St. Lucia since the pandemic, comprised the institution of a debt service suspension initiative and provision of funds under the Rapid Response Facility toward budgetary support and the healthcare response to COVID-19. Now, this initial financing has focused on the health impact of the crisis through the procurement of equipment and supplies, strengthening health systems, and the expansion of social protection for vulnerable groups. On Wednesday, during the press briefing, the Honorable Prime Minister did state that these recent offerings, and we saw it rolling out during the course of the last few months, these recent offerings, though useful, I'm using his words, were not adequate, as there were other ways in which the development partners can assist. And listen, if I can go back, my memory serves me right, I believe it was, he was speaking on the use of the vulnerability index, and also the vulnerability index and the request to
for concessional for financing,
concessional financing, budgetary support
for loans.
Yes. So there are definitely other ways that small island developing states are looking to get support from the World Bank, especially as they prepare their budgets for the next year, their budgetary cycle. Honorable Shastney says also consideration for the gross domestic product, which is how the World Bank views and determines who needs assistance. It should not be considered in times of shocks. And so smooth, if there are any shocks, external shocks, you have a disaster in the country, that it should be it should not be considered as part of the consideration for assistance as the countries look for some budgetary support.
Because we saw that in the case of Antigua, and we did mention that earlier when we were on previously, when some of the islands, we were able to get that sort of support from institutions like the IMF. You found that for Antigua, simply basing it on its GDP, did not receive that sort of assistance. And it is something that the ambassador, His Excellency Ronald Sanders, spoke very strongly about at the recent meeting that was held. And so these sort of situations, it really places the Caribbean at a disadvantage, because in the case of Barbados, for example, you know, the Prime Minister, Honorable Mia Mottley, has really been on a campaign trying to see, you know, apart from the IMF, there are other lending agencies out there, but they are calling on for the debt. And Barbados is one of the most indebted countries. I think it is behind Japan, Sudan. So I think it's like the fourth most indebted country there is. And that is certainly does a blow to Barbados, and not just Barbados, it's to the Caribbean. Because if it happens to one, it's going to happen to all of us, because again, we're all in it together. So at the end of the day, the fight is really being taken on by our leaders in order to allow these international institutions to understand that while you may believe that just on a GDP basis, we are quote unquote rich, as one of the chief economists from the IMF indicated, that is not the case when you really have to break down and look at what's happening on that sort of socio-economic level. You know, that really just isn't the case. And it is becoming, I think that in some ways strides are being made, and then at the same time, we have situations that regress the progress.
Yeah, and we also saw during the discussions, the Honorable Prime Minister and the finance officials did indicate that diversification came up. The officials at the World Bank are asking for our economies in the small island developing states to diversify their products and not really have a heavy reliance on one particular sector.
But then at the same time, we're turned around and we're punished and blacklisted.
Yes, the criticism.
So, right. So the constant shifting of the goalpost makes it very difficult
to thrive
for small countries like ourselves to be able to have a fair shot, if you will.
Absolutely. If we could just go to the clip from the chief economist at the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Janai Leonce, and he is speaking and did indicate the case that they made to the IMF and the World Bank in terms of addressing the lack of economic diversification here in the region.
If you are going to advise that there is some level of diversification, which the region has pursued, the international community really needs to have proportionate levels of regulation where there is risk. If we look at our IBC regimes, if we look at our CIP and our other regimes, the level of risk that is associated with those relative to the global pool is extremely small. Yet still those services receive a level of scrutiny where some may even wonder whether the international community is trying to just shut down all of our industries like that.
Leonce did assure us that headway was made when this matter was discussed at the annual meetings of the IMF and the Board of Governors of the World Bank.
We wanted a nuanced debate with the international community to say, listen, the region has pursued a multiplicity of efforts to diversify, to ensure that you have that stability in revenue intake, so that revenues are not necessarily contingent on one sector. But you need that international community support to say, yes, we hear you, and where you do diversify, we are willing to provide some level of support. And yes, we are willing to also regulate, but that regulation should be proportionate to the risk that you bring to the global community. And if you look at our region, or the Caribbean region, there does appear to be a disproportionate level of scrutiny of our region relative to some of the other jurisdictions.
Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Honorable Alan Chasney, says that St. Lucia's plan for diversification of its economy has been met with favorable reception by the IMF. And he's not just talking about diversification away from tourism, but also the diversification of the tourism sector itself with subsectors. Take a look.
The World Bank and the IMF absolutely agreed with St. Lucia's strategy. And the managing director of the IMF, Kristalina, came out very early and said, build as much as you can build and keep the receipts. And so the idea of investing in infrastructure, continuing the airport project, fixing up the roads, getting the water problems resolved, looking to get the port situation resolved here, the redevelopment of the Cascades market, the redevelopment of village tourism, which opens up now Airbnb, which is another huge tourism sector. Persons after COVID, many of the persons don't want to go to the large resorts. So they want to come now to smaller properties. Putting in the infrastructure in ancillary, canneries, Soufriere, and eventually into the other villages are all a mechanism to help now with that diversification program.
The Prime Minister, the Director of Finance, and the Chief Economist in the Ministry of Finance speaking earlier this week there on the outcome of the annual meetings of the IMF and the World Bank Board of Governors. St. Lucia bids farewell to outgoing Canadian High Commissioner, Her Excellency Marie Gault. His Excellency Sir Emmanuel Neville Snack hosted a ceremony for the diplomat at Government House to say farewell. Okay, we're having some technical difficulties with that story, but it was definitely, you know, a goodbye to Her Excellency Marie Gault, who has so far seen to the implementation, the establishment of a center, the visa center here in St. Lucia for applications. Now we do not have to go to the other islands to apply for a Canadian visa. And also we've so far seen efforts to assist women and children at risk by the Canadian government. So far, among many other efforts on her part and during her stint as the Canadian High Commissioner. We're having some technical difficulties in tracking that report, but we continue with the EAP report. Thousands of St. Lucians are benefiting from the recently launched Electricity Assistance Program. We have details in this report coming from the Office of the Prime Minister. Okay. What we're going to do is just take a quick break so we could just get our wires connected. Stay with us. When we come back, we continue to take a look at the week that was.
We got this. Yeah. I feel make it. Ooh. We have no other choice but to be strong.
We're gonna make it.
Amen. My God.
I am a voice of hope, and I just wanna let you know.
Over us, and I believe if we all come together now, everything will be alright. strong, the battle is on.
The future of each generation. Every daughter and son united as one.
Sing on, Caribbean. Don't worry about the circumstances. Don't stress about the fears and the night. Together we will take our chance at life and conquer it. Don't worry about the circumstances. Must come. Don't stress about the fears and the night. Together we will take our chance. No stress. We got this. We got this. We got this. We got this. Hear me? Roughy, toughy, dirty, no still have to get up. One for me like the giddy and we have to stand up. As virus a rush, we still can't touch, we still can't crush we. We have faith, hope, strength, protection of the Almighty.
And we prayed up, yes, we prayed up. And we stayed up, yes, we stayed up. Head high full of confidence, we not keep pocket tight, then we never gave up. Make up essential weapons, rest in peace, we fallen soldiers. Corona can't go, we rest in peace, one love and unity.
Don't worry about the circumstances. Don't stress about the fears and the madness. Together we will take our chance at life. We got this. We got this. We got
We got this.
Thank you so much for staying with us. We're now down to our final segment of the morning, looking back at the week that was. And we saw earlier this week, we came to work here at the offices of the GIS to some disturbing developments regarding our office. A break-in resulted in the damage of equipment valued at tens of thousands of dollars. A principal information officer, our boss lady, Davina Lee, has more on the incident and the ongoing investigations.
A security breach occurred at the Government Information Service and NTN studios located at the Eunora House, Point Seraphine, sometime between the night of Wednesday, 28 October and the morning of Thursday, 29 October 2020. Hard drives containing approximately 120 terabytes of data, which included valuable historical footage of national importance, was purposely destroyed, as those drives were dismantled and a substance poured over them. Technical editing bays at the GIS were also ransacked, and a DVR machine containing surveillance footage is currently missing. This matter is now in the hands of the Criminal Investigations Department of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force and is under active investigation. If any member of the public has any information on this occurrence, please contact the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. Programming from the Government Information Service will continue as normal as we continue to fulfill our mandate of information dissemination to the nation, which is of critical importance at this time. Thank you.
I think we'll just leave that there. That was explicit enough in terms of the incident that occurred. And, you know, as we wrap up the morning, we have an update from the Department of Education, Innovation and Gender Relations, informing the general public of the following. There is a 50% reduction in the fees for reviews for candidates who wrote the 2020 May-June examinations. Fees are now US $15 and must be paid through the purchase of a bank draft. Where a candidate submitted a request prior to this decision, a 50% refund will be given to those candidates whose reviews did not result in a grade change, or a full refund for those who attained an improved grade. The deadline for the submission of requests for queries and reviews is the 6th of November 2020. The deadline for registration for January 2021 examinations has been extended to 11th November 2020. For further information, you can contact the Evaluation and Assessment Unit of the Department at 468-5222 or 5242 or 5243. And finally, for the morning, the National Commission for UNESCO has provided funding to the Special Education Unit and the Department of Sustainable Development for the undertaking of two major education projects. We now go to that report.
A joint check presentation to the Special Education Unit and the Department of Sustainable Development marks the official start of two projects, providing reading support for students with print disabilities at the Lady Gordon Opportunity Center and strengthening the legislative and institutional framework for the promotion of science and technology. Each project receives a budget allocation of US $20,000 under the UNESCO Participation Program for the 2020-2021 biennium. Director General of the National Commission for UNESCO, Marcia Symforia, says the two initiatives are in keeping with UNESCO's 2020-2021 strategic priorities of increasing learning opportunities for persons in vulnerable situations, with particular attention to crisis-affected populations, as well as persons with learning challenges, and harnessing sciences for sustainable development.
That St. Lucia was successful in securing funding for 3 participation program projects at the first meeting of the approval committee, at a time when the organization is itself feeling the impact of reduced funding from donor agencies, and as well the challenges faced by member states in meeting their own financial contributions to the organization, speaks volumes of the quality of the submissions that are made to UNESCO from St. Lucia. In that regard, I wish to congratulate the Department of Sustainable Development for these 2 excellent projects.
The first project, providing reading support for students with print disabilities at the Lady Gordon Opportunity Center, seeks to improve access for students with dyslexia, low vision, or select mobility impairment to reading materials in digital formats that fit their specific learning needs.
This project consists, among other activities, of a book share library that St. Lucia will be part of, which is the world's largest online system, as well as a Braille One device, which allows a visually impaired individual to interact with a computer without the assistance of someone else. This project arose in a timely manner, considering that the country has been impacted by COVID, and we've had to close schools yet again.
That was Minister for Education, Innovation, Gender Relations, and Sustainable Development, Honorable Dr. Gail Rigobert. Education Officer for Special Education, Dale Segiste, says this project effort is invaluable.
One of the challenges within the special education subsector is that reading is very challenging. It is difficult, and there are many of our students who actually do not acquire that skill. But as I said before, one of the key components of achieving that goal is to provide appropriate resources. And the exciting thing about this project is that it will make literacy a lot more accessible to more students.
The second project, an initiative to strengthen the legislative and institutional framework for the promotion of science and technology, has a key objective to ensure that science and technology becomes one of the vital bases for the development and growth of St. Lucia. Sustainable Development Officer coordinating the project is Berthia Thomas.
The Department of Sustainable Development is currently collaborating with the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council, the NCPC, who is in a process of developing a national competitiveness agenda for St. Lucia. And one of the outputs of this agenda is a national science, technology, and innovation policy. And we're hoping that at the completion of this, we can develop through this project, its wife, so to speak, its partner, so to speak, the National Science and Technology Strategy and Action Plan. So what we have in the policy, we want to put it into action and guide our activities.
Other initiatives attached to the project include the strengthening of the research agenda in St. Lucia, the continuation of the Science and Technology Summer Camps, and the hosting of the first ever St. Lucia Female Icons in Science, Technology, and Innovation Forum. Portfolio Minister Honorable Dr. Rigobert says her ministry will spare no effort to see both projects through.
We will continue to work assiduously to ascertain the successful implementation of both projects and to ensure that whatever resources are to be employed to To realize the fruition of these, we will employ all the energy, resources, human capital that we have to so do, noting that successful implementation refers to a project which meets all of its expected objectives and outputs and effectively undertakes its program of activities in keeping with the stipulated guidelines.
UNESCO's project launch took place on Monday, 26 October 2020, at the Department of Sustainable Development. From the Government Information Service, I am Jessie Leonce reporting.
Well, that brings us to the end of our Week in Review live on NTN this Saturday morning, the last day of October 2020. I'd like to thank you so much for watching. Just to go over the headlines, government announces stricter protocols to address COVID-19 community spread. And in the press conference that was held yesterday, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet of Ministers have agreed to put in place a few measures to help combat the spread of COVID-19 in country. Among the measures is a call for employers to institute work-from-home programs, and also the announcement that school will remain closed for the month of November. However, there will be the ensuring of continued learning via the blended learning approach. As to COVID-19 patients, and then another COVID-19 patient recover, we had 2 more confirmed on Friday, 30th of October, as we close down the week. Government of St. Lucia heeds to the advice of the IMF for economic diversification, but calls for proportionate regulation for their emerging industries. And finally, we had the GIS this week suffering immense loss, tens of thousands of dollars in losses following a break-in. Final words?
Certainly, I want to implore all St. Lucians to adhere to the measures, though we say that it's stricter measures, but certainly we know that we're asking for the voluntary limitation of your movement when it comes, from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Let's try to stay off the roads. If it's not necessary, just stay home. And also to watch your numbers when you're congregating. We know that we've been moved from 50 people down to 25. What we consider to be a mass crowd event, if you will. So just be very careful of that and to continue to observe all the protocols, because that's what will keep you safe.
Certainly. And again, well, this weekend we're expecting some rain, so we're asking all our listeners, our viewers, all St. Lucians, to just remain safe. Those persons in low-lying areas take the necessary precautions. And as well, our St. Lucians in the United States, we're just asking you, of course, to remain calm. We know that you have a big election coming up next week. Those of you that are capable, do go out and vote, and just do what it takes to remain safe amidst the pandemic of the coronavirus as well.
Wonderful. And on that note, we hope that you are adhering to the protocols. And 1 week down in terms of our look back at the COVID-19 trends, but we have 4 more weeks to show ourselves approved to the officials, to show that we can, take responsibility, continue to take responsibility for ourselves in terms of adherence to the protocols. We did hear from the CMO, Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Sharon Belmont-George, that following which there will be a review to determine if more stringent or a relaxing of the measures will be necessitated. So please take note of that. Do your best on your way to work, on commute, on the buses, at work. Don't remove the mask when you finally get to your job, because there are persons from your workplace who are coming from a number of various locations island-wide. So please take note of that and reduce your numbers, as Lisa indicated. The max for group activities is 25, and try to stay in your family unit. I believe just last week when CMO was speaking about Journée Creole activities, she did indicate to stay within your family unit. School is out and persons may feel the need to socialize, but if you stay with your family, bond a little bit more with your family, have a good time with them, things should go okay for us all. My name is Jessie Leonce, signing off on behalf of Lisa and Tony. We'd like to thank you so much for tuning into NTN and making us your morning program this Saturday. Continue to observe the protocols and look out for more NTN programming as we bring you the latest coming from the government of St. Lucia. Enjoy the weekend. Cheers.